on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
Research will tell you that if you give people support, you're more likely to retain them.
Right.
We know we have a shortage. We have to identify the areas that we can support them on and then find the support available and get it to them when they need it, where they need it.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Koopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Koopman, Executive Director of the IAPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IAPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As Executive Director of IAPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IAPSS is here and why we're proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in the public education space while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IAPSS, developing great school district leaders. It is always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show, so let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Mr. Todd Whitlock, President and CEO of Standard for Success. As well as numerous public speaking engagements, he has been instrumental in shaping the conversation about Indiana public schools and has the ability to look at education from various lenses, which is very important. Of course, he has been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana. Let's find out how he views some of the issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Mr. Whitlock. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us on today's podcast. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you've developed Standard for Success.
Thank you, Dr. Koopman, for allowing us to come on and speak with you today. It's a pleasure to be with you. Obviously, I've known you for quite some time, worked with you in various roles.
Absolutely.
So just a little bit about myself. I was an educator. I recently left that a few years ago. I was 20 years in public education, the last 16 in district administration, in charge of technology, curriculum, and a number of other initiatives at the local level there, but actively involved at the state level with the Hoosier Educational Computer Coordinators and other organizations, including being on the state textbook adoption committee before that went away as well.
Right.
So it's been a pleasure to work with a number of school districts around Indiana and actually around the country as they implemented new innovative ideas from one-to-one technology almost 16 years ago now in some cases, and then develop and expand Standard for Success, a company that myself and three other educators, two of them here in Indiana, co-founded a number of years ago, almost 7 years ago now, as we addressed a need in Indiana for managing the employee evaluation process as the law changed.
Right. Yep. And that's been a tremendous asset for our public schools, and for you to be on the cutting edge of developing that instrument. I can't tell you how many people have appreciated the work that Standard for Success has done in that space.
Well, we really enjoy the work because it gives us an opportunity to be educators. It gives us an opportunity to stay involved in the active role of helping educators get better at their trade, ultimately to impact and make a difference in student achievement and the success of our communities that we all work in. So it's been very important for us, and with the education background that we all have, it has allowed us to stay current and also to speak the language that the educators are speaking as we try to meet their needs.
So that's not something that we've had in our space before. So how important is the evaluation software in response to the needs in the field? And what opportunities do you see right now for transforming educational opportunities for our students with this tool?
Well, I think it's very important, and we really in the last year or so have been stressing the term going beyond compliance, because as school districts throughout the nation, actually across the country, implemented new policies and procedures to be compliant with new laws that went into effect, it became really evident that they implemented them quickly, as they had to. But now we have collected data for 6 or 7 years, and it's time to start using that data. We know that in Indiana, especially in rural Indiana and urban Indiana, and across the nation, we know that there is a teacher shortage.
Sure.
So now we have all of this data that we've collected. It's time to go beyond compliance.
Right.
It's time to really start developing our teacher prep programs, our professional development at the building level and at the district level to retain teachers. We were fortunate enough to do a study of 60 school districts a couple years ago, and we looked at 3 years of teacher evaluation data. And we looked at it differently than what's reported to the state, because we know at the state we get one number, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and 90+% of our educators are effective and above. But it didn't tell us anything.
Sure.
It didn't tell us anything to drive policy. So we studied the data and actually found that there were certain indicators that were kind of outliers. So we know that through that, it was 16 or 17% of the teachers in Indiana were in that study. So we found one of the most alarming issues that came out. We found that sometime during the school year, that last year of the study, that 14% of them were marked less than effective sometime during the school year on maximizing instructional time. So as we start talking about student achievement and the amount of money that we spend on remediation programs and everything else, if we're not utilizing the time well in the classroom, we're not going to see a change in student achievement.
Right.
So now we have data, and we're really going to be advocating at the state level that we actually change what we're collecting.
Sure.
Because if we have data that actually tells us what's happening in the classroom, we can start working with higher ed to change our teacher prep programs.
Yep.
We can start working at the building level to start giving support throughout the school year instead of at the end of the year a snapshot of what's happening, to actually improve instructional practices. So that's been really key as we've gone into this field and as we've collected data and working with the association. You know, you guys have been very active in that, the Principal Association as well, to advocate that we now start using the data.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's a waste of everybody's time if we're not going to use it to drive growth.
So you have that data collected. So how do you view that as the future for Standard Success, and what does this mean for administrators?
Well, one of the things is we're more than just a software company. Because we are educators, we understand that we can help you collect the data, but we can also help you use the data.
Right.
So we want to be able to help coach and mentor teachers and and instructional coaches and administrators on how to use the data to get better at what they're doing.
Right.
And if we're able to do that, we feel that we can help expand our offerings, but also more importantly, we can help expand the effectiveness of what's happening in the classroom. And that's where I think we're trying to set ourselves apart with that.
From your work in the field, what are you seeing in relationship to instructional coaches and their availability to coach and mentor teachers?
Well, I think instructional coaches are used in a variety of ways. It depends on the district and it depends on the need, obviously. We would hope, and we see some that are starting to use the evaluation data as one component to actually start working the instructional coach, working with the classroom teacher to develop those skills that they may not be doing well. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of times instructional coaches are used as a standalone or co-teacher, not necessarily helping instruct and improve the teaching practice. It's more of a co-teacher, and therefore, it's, in my mind, that's not an instructional coach. That's just a co-teacher.
Right.
So we want to use the data that we're collecting to actually help the teacher get better. To me, that's the role of the instructional coach, and we'd like to help with that role as well.
Sure. And you mentioned teacher shortages and the importance of a mentor in retaining teachers. How are you viewing that part of the world?
So with the mentor, one of the things that is really hard, having been an administrator and a number of our people being administrators, if you're the one giving feedback that is part of your job performance and possibly part of your pay, it's awful hard to be also a mentor for that teacher. So we feel it's important for administrator mentors and teacher mentors to be someone that's non-threatening.
Right.
So not somebody that's giving feedback on their evaluation, but can look at that data and work with them to improve on those skills in a non-threatening manner.
Yep.
And I think that's really important.
I absolutely agree with that. So there's a term that we kind of use in education. It's called inter-rater reliability. What kind of training is required to have a valid inter-rater reliability?
So one of the things that in Indiana we're required to do, if you do evaluations, you're supposed to be trained on the evaluation process. We've been fortunate enough that we've done a lot of the training for evaluators throughout the state. And one of the things that we really focus on is inter-rater reliability. We want to make sure that every person going in the classroom has the same expectations of what they're looking for.
Sure.
And unfortunately, many of the administrator prep programs are not focusing on that. They're focusing more on the coursework, which is very important.
Right.
But the application of that coursework and actually understanding what you're seeing happening in the classroom, whether you're in there 5 minutes or 50 minutes,
Right.
putting it down in a meaningful way that a teacher can understand the feedback to improve. So the inter-rater reliability function of that is bringing administrators together, looking at a teaching lesson, making sure that you're collecting the evidence. Scripting is a common term. And then looking at your scripting and how you rate it so it's consistent.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the same, but it has to be consistent.
Right.
So one of the key things, the inter-rater reliability, that I really have stressed with a number of small districts, we have a number of schools in Indiana that have one administrator.
Yep.
And as we know, if there's only one administrator giving feedback to a teacher, we have no inter-rater reliability. And in fact, I have cautioned a number of superintendents that we have to be very cautious with this, because it'd be very, very easy for an employee to claim bias if there's not more than one set of eyes giving them feedback.
Right.
And with that, ourselves and a number of other companies are actually providing services coming in and being a second set of eyes for 1 or 2 evaluations a year to get that inter-rater reliability and work with their administrators to make sure that they're getting uniform but different feedback.
Sure.
So that's a key function, and that's one thing that we really want to make sure that your membership remembers that, because the last thing we want is to not be able to help a teacher improve because there may be some concern about bias in there.
And Stand Up for Success can provide for that second set of eyes? Is that what I'm hearing?
We do. We have a number of administrators that have been trained and are experienced at that and are very good at giving feedback. And we're doing it for a number of schools. We're going in as a secondary evaluator and give some of that feedback. And our people like it because it keeps them connected.
Sure.
It keeps them connected to what's happening in the classroom and able to get that feedback to help us also develop our software even further.
Well, you just provided some insight for me on inter-rater reliability, because I was thinking that if you had multiple administrators using this tool, there had to be consistency on how multiple administrators were using it. But you've actually pointed out something to me that if it's one administrator, that also creates a problem for inter-rater reliability. Didn't even dawn on me.
It does, and unfortunately, that's something that we don't think about a lot.
Right.
Because typically, most of our teachers are doing a very good job. But for those that may need some guidance, only one set of eyes can cause some problems, and that's something we're really trying to stress people that they have to remember that as well.
That is absolutely great advice. So how can educators use Stand Up for Success as part of their professional development?
Well, one of the things in Indiana that we've developed in collaboration with the associations and the teachers union and so forth is the ability to actually track their professional growth in there. So they can either create a professional growth plan themselves or in collaboration with their administrators. Whether they're a highly effective teacher or an improvement necessary or ineffective teacher, they can still identify their strengths and weaknesses and what they want to get better at and use that data that's being collected to actually make informed decisions on what do I want to do to get better, and then track it. Sure. Because we know that if we don't track it and we don't measure it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So we put it down, we start tracking it, and then it turns into a collaborative process. because we want it to be a transparent and collaborative process between the teacher and administrator,
Right.
but also between the building principals and district office.
Yep.
We want our administrators to get better at what they're doing as well, so they can use that for professional development in there as well. It also goes back to the coaching and mentoring we talked about. Another feature that we build into it is the ability to have actually online videos embedded in the software. So we partner with Educational Impact and Ed Leaders Network to actually have subscriptions built in. So if Dr. Koopman was evaluating Mr. Whitlock and found that I was struggling with engagement, as we mentioned earlier, you could actually assign me a video to watch, maybe a 30-minute video on somebody that's doing engagement well. I could reflect upon that, record it in the system. We could come back and meet, and then you could watch me implement what I've learned. Or if it was something that was more detailed, maybe it needs to be a 5 or 6 hour course that had multiple videos with assessments in it. You could then follow up, and it's all recorded in the system. The next feature of that is we can also record that as part of the Elvis system. So we know how many growth points that it meets. The teacher is able to keep track of their growth points, or administrator, and then when comes time for license renewal, it's right there at their fingertips. They don't have to go searching for all the certificates and everything that they've had.
So you've actually worked with the licensing bureau or department on these points, and so they align with the assignments that administrators and teachers are working on.
We have the Indiana codes in there, the proper categories, and they can track those by the number of hours. And ultimately, we've talked to Dr. Keller and some of them that we'd love to be able to automate that process for the educators that are in our system to make it easier for the department and also for the Indiana educators.
What a tremendous asset for teachers, to have that tool available, and for administrators. Plus, it's going to count toward their license renewal. And that's awesome.
It's twofold. When you use the online professional development, it's the ability to get anytime, anywhere learning. It's not right for everybody,
Right.
but for some people it fits.
Sure.
So it's a low cost alternative as we try to keep teachers in the classroom.
Right.
It's a way to keep them in the classroom, but still give them some of the support they need. Research will tell you that if you give people support, you're more likely to retain them.
Right.
We know we have a shortage. We have to identify the areas that we can support them on, and then find the support available and get it to them when they need it, where they need it.
Well, but as an administrator, you've developed a tool to help me do evaluations in classrooms, but you've also provided a tool that when I see some weaknesses, that I can refer to these tools that you already have built in for the teacher. And that was something that, as an administrator, of course, that was a while ago, that I struggled with, is trying to find appropriate resources to refer teachers to so they could get better.
Well, it's hard because, time is of essence. And as administrators, you only have so many hours in the day.
Yep.
And you have so much that's put on your plate. So if someone else is out there curating the information for you and you can search it for keywords, that's what we try to do to make it easier.
That's fabulous. So what resources are available to build awareness and to build bridges for educators in Standard for Success?
So as we've talked about, we try to make the process simple.
Right.
Because it has to be something that's easy to use. And then as we have put the online professional development in there, also we've built the ability where you can actually load your own. So if you already have a catalog of resources that you've developed locally, you can put it in the system so it's there for you to assign. Rather than have to use multiple software platforms, it's all can be integrated into the system as well.
Okay.
So we always are listening. What else do you need?
Yep.
What else can we provide? And that leads us to continue to develop resources and enhancements in the system. It's all based on user feedback.
Sure. Well, that's one of the things that I have learned to appreciate about you and Standard for Success, is that you are never status quo, is how can we get better? What can we do to serve you better? And you're always looking for that next opportunity that's going to help educators be better teachers, better administrators, and the end result is higher student achievement. So I really appreciate that about Standard for Success.
Well, we appreciate it, and we call ourselves an evergreen product, so it's never static.
Sure.
And we're fortunate that our CTO was a teacher by trade, so he understands as he's programming and working with programmers how simple it needs to be for the end user to use.
Right.
And that has allowed us to change things quickly. Where others may take weeks or months to implement something, if an end user brings an idea today and we feel that it needs to be implemented right away, it'll probably be programmed tonight.
Yeah.
and they'll have it at their fingertips tomorrow. That's important for us.
Wow. That's what I call the ability to be not only flexible and adaptable, but responsive. So that's terrific.
It is. We try to respond to our customers in a timely manner, and we've been fortunate enough to win some awards for our customer service. But it's again, we've been the end user.
Sure.
So we understand, just as we tell teachers, don't lose a teachable moment, we don't want our administrators to lose a teachable moment to be able to give feedback to help a teacher grow.
Yeah, that's great advice. How can administrators use Standard for Success for our new graduation pathways tracking?
So obviously this is something completely different for us, but we had a number of end users request that we try to figure out a way to help them track the process and the paperwork. Just as the teacher evaluation laws changed years ago, we knew it's going to require a lot of paperwork, a lot of spreadsheets.
Sure.
And so we have listened and very quickly have developed and actually rolling it out this week, a graduation pathways tool for counselors and administrators to use. So we're importing their student data, their student list, and they can do it manually, or we can import their grades and so forth. So we can keep track of the requirements. The box 1, 2, 3, and 4 is what the principals and guidance counselors are talking about. So we'll be able to quickly know if a student is on a certain concentrator, and if they decide to switch concentrators, make sure the grades are all there and easily calculated to help them know, so they can very quickly see how their students are doing.
Sure.
But also we build in the ability for them to interact with their students, and I believe it's box 2 where they have the work requirement,
right,
where they can actually send a link to the student or to the employer to verify that they've met that requirement and upload it straight in the system as well.
Yeah. Well, here again, we were just talking about responsiveness. This is a new the graduation pathways are new to Indiana, and you're being responsive and trying to help administrators and counselors keep track of all of that, because there's a lot of detail to all of that information. And so I think that you're really onto something with that graduation pathways tool that'll be an essential for school districts to have in their arsenal.
Well, we hope so, and we know that it's going to continue to evolve in Indiana. So as it evolves, we'll quickly change it to be able to meet the requirements, so they can track that and also then provide that service to their students.
Sure. I'm sure that have you touched base with our state board of education on what you have and the tools that you have made available for our schools?
The state board is aware of our evaluation component. Obviously, we've been lucky enough to present to them and the legislative body on our research and our data that we collect. They're not aware of the pathways yet because it's been developed in response very quickly to the end users. But we hope to show them that tool very quickly, so they can give us feedback as well as there additional things they'd like to see us track for the schools that could report back to them as well.
Right. Well, in closing, what advice would you have for our Indiana school leaders as we move forward in this ever-changing landscape?
Well, I think it's important to remember that our jobs constantly change.
Right.
And we're there for the students, but we also have to support the people that are in front of the students every day. Yep. And also the administrators at the building level, at the district level that are helping. Sure. It's not individual jobs. It's a collaborative job. Yeah. And hopefully what we have, and in response and working with the associations, we can help along that process. Sure. Don't be satisfied with where we are now. You and I both know that we both have been in different roles in education and educational technology, know that it changes. So don't be satisfied where we are with what we're providing now. Yeah. Always look to improve it. Right. And I believe that we will continue to be a very successful state and continue to see student improvement and teacher and administrative prep programs change if we actually look at the data. Sure. Well, I can't tell you from my perspective how much I appreciate the work that you've done and the product that you have put out there, the research that is behind all of this. And I know that it's not just in Indiana, but you are in several other states across the United States helping educators do the right things. And then with your professional development tool that you've embedded, I just can't think of a better product out there than Standard for Success.
So.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate the partnership as well with the association. It means a lot to us as a company, and me personally, you know that. So we thank you for letting us be part of your association and a partner as well.
Well, we appreciate it. I want to thank Mr. Whitlock for being our guest on IPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight. Now it's time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in the Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Although you pointed out that accountability is still important, but there are many factors that go into preparing all students to become lifelong learners and contributors in the 21st century. As such, we need to begin to change the dialogue. As we enter the next session of the Indiana General Assembly, we need to focus on education issues such as testing that does not enhance learning but is used for how we evaluate schools and teachers. Do we really need a snapshot in time as a metric for evaluating public schools, teachers, and students? As such, we need to change the dialogue. Due to the complex issues associated with the school reform, we need to engage our communities and have them help us develop the portrait of a graduate. As such, and the process is very important, and the final product, as such, we also need to change the dialogue. Through this public dialogue, it is my hope that we can get our legislators and our state leaders to see the value of public schools and as the nexus of promoting public schools as economic development in Hoosier communities. I see these as investments in our state, not as expenditures. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment. On our next show, November 19th, we welcome Mr. Robin Winston and Mr. Pat Terrell, principals and owners of the Winston Terrell Group. Perhaps they can provide some additional insight into the State House and education. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being part of education. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.